Good morning. Welcome to day 3 here at APEX. It's the last day of the show. We've had a very busy week, and I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Skinner, who's the editor of US Tech.
Glad to be here.
Great to see you, Mike. So, impressions of the show. What do you think were your the highlights of the event this week?
This week has been amazing because as far as over the last couple of years, the mood itself is much more optimistic. Last year felt like a little bit of it was a little slow. You know, this year everybody was amped. I mean, even on Monday on setup day when we were kind of wandering around and checking out what was new. That's really the mood is much
very positive feel throughout the show, and I think that's been carried on from Productronica, which of course was a very positive show as well. Looking at what's actually new on the floor, I think the biggest buzz around the show was obviously CFX. This is the software standard which is coming out later in the year, but they had a proof of concept here, and I think we can see some of the results if you look on the screen of the amount of involvement people have had throughout the week. There's been over 616,000 messages this week, which is quite incredible. I think there's 23 companies on the show floor that are actually connected to this, so if you're a visitor at the show, you can use your cell phone to hook into it and actually watch what's happening in real time, or if you're dialing in from outside, you can also go onto the IPC website and pull it up.
It's fun, it's fun to be able to go to the different booths and see the same interface, just as like a basic kind of understanding of. We were at Kaizen and he logged in, or I was at KIC and he logged in, ASM they logged in. It was really neat to see just around the floor.
Right, excellent. So the other sort of software applications that were out there were some pretty cool ones. There was one from ASM called Command Center. Again, another concept because it's not going to be released till later in the year, but the idea is to try and reduce the number of dedicated operators on the line. And ASM also, they have a basic sort of rudimentary setup there for the demo for the show floor, but they also have had a history of bringing out something that's a little bit progressive, that's not quite finished yet, like a year ago or so when they were doing the smart classes for maintenance, and they were allowing their technicians to dial in from overseas to show somebody in real time how to fix things. This program is amazing because it allows the operator sitting at the Star Trek dashboard to delegate tasks either remotely or local to any operator who's qualified to do it on a basis of priority. It's wonderful.
So that was really neat to see.
And they get the message either on a smart watch or a tablet. But you know, the key thing, as you alluded to there, is that they have to have the skill set to be able to perform the task. It's not a case of, oh, you're the nearest operator, so go replenish that machine. It's a case of, you're the nearest operator with the skill set to do that job. Go to that machine. So that was really interesting. Another software-related display at the show was from Vitrox, the V1. And what I liked about this is you could overlay AOI onto SBI onto X-ray. And see all the data and drill down to the board, drill down to the defect, and literally get full traceability. It really is a very intuitive, very easy to use system. I loved that. So that was that. There's a couple of other things we're going to talk about, but we're going to have a guest joining us after the break, Tom Forsyth, who I know you know very well. So let's cut to commercial break, and we'll see Tom joining us shortly. And welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about software solutions that we've seen on the floor, and I'm pleased to introduce my guest, Tom Forsyth. Tom. As I said before,
good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Before the break, I was talking with Mike about the different software applications we've seen on the floor. Obviously, CFX
is new and emerging.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we looked at some of the involvement that some of the visitors to the show and people who are not at the show were having with that software. You know, they either could dial into the website,
right,
or you could put it onto your cell phone. And over 616,000 messages this week.
That's a lot of messages.
That's a lot of messages.
That's a lot of messages. Well, and I think that really speaks to the point is that, you know, we're in an industry where we make all these sophisticated toys, right? And we do this, that, you know, we go to the moon, all the gear, and therefore we have the ability to capture data at a ferocious rate.
Right.
And that data point by itself speaks to the real challenge, that it's not about data, because if we've been here for 3 days, and if we're trying to make sense of something, 500,000 data points in 3 days seems like a tall drink of water.
Right, exactly. So it's how to manage that volume of data.
Exactly, and I think that's the really interesting part. Okay, is that there's you know, the CFX is a standard to try to bring some comedy to the whole idea of let's move some information around, but fundamentally it still falls back to sector experts making sense of their data. You know, we're not the guy to tell you what's wrong with your printer. Your printer guy is not the guy to tell you what's wrong with your cleaner.
Right.
Those sector experts are the people that are going to pick through the wheat from the chaff, make sense of that data, provide some analytics, provide perhaps some predictive analytics with a bit of luck.
Right.
And that's, it seems to me, is likely to be the path forward, at least for this phase of evolution.
Right. I think another huge benefit that Mike and I were talking about on the break is that is the traceability data. So you have all that volume of data as we discussed, but then of course if something goes wrong in the field and you have field failures, you've always got that data to go back and mine into.
Absolutely, I think that's a key value adder from the customer's perspective.
It seems to me that you have three main points with the data in the factory. You have one, that you're gathering all this information that you can use just to make your machine work better and more efficient. Your materials, you can handle them better and distribute them better. And then obviously the traceability, so that you can tell at any point when something has gone wrong and where it's gone wrong, and you can call in, like you said, a subject matter expert to come in. And then also something you said early on in the week that really struck me was that sometimes it's just a matter of having the information so that you can show the customer that something has never gone wrong.
Right.
Just pure data to show this has always been inspected.
And that's key, and we forget about that. You know, we often focus on the high volume things, the cell phones, some of the consumer stuff that's remarkable volume, right? And in that world, things have a relatively short lifetime, and you know, failure is a pure end of life cycle sort of game. But yet what moves a lot of the technology in our industry are those more long-lived assets. Those things that are, whether they're a medical device or a space system device, that are not high volume generally, but have significant demands and real, often life and death implications for failure. Well, in those environments, that traceability back to say, okay, we had an unexpected failure out in the field, wherever it may have been, and we, from a, not so much from a liability perspective perhaps, but from a preventing it in the future, continuous improvement sort of philosophy, how do we go back and identify where our expectations may have exceeded our capabilities. And having that data to help expedite that review. You know, we're seeing that already with our systems, where, you know, customers are saying, okay, I've got an expectation problem that things aren't meeting those, and I want to improve it, but I don't know where to start.
Right.
You know, I'm not sure so the quicker I can access some data that says, all right, well, this area, well, gee, everything's totally in spec here. All right, I'm going to move on and make sure everything else is totally in spec before I come back around and say, well, maybe I need to revisit those specs. Right, and being able to do that rapidly, I think is a real benefit to the users.
Absolutely, you know. In fact, it's interesting because we live in an industry where we have so many people who spend their life in it, being experts, and then they end up retiring, and we lose all of that that expertise,
that tribal knowledge.
Yeah, that tribal knowledge, and I think with these new software systems coming in and capturing more of that data, we're retaining some of that.
I think,
for the future.
Experience is simply watching a lot of things, right? I mean, what's the standard 8,000 hours it takes to become a true expert of something, right? You know, and if you do it for 5 minutes a day, well, you never become an expert, right? Because you can't ever get to 8,000, not enough days. Well, the data doesn't sleep. So if we in fact can achieve these standards of where that data can really be crunched in a very effective way to not cause people to swim in 500,000 data points and scratch their head and decide, well, what should I consider? But rather, all right, I'm using that 500,000 data points to feed into a system that those tribal knowledge experts have said, well, here's where we should be focusing. Now I think you're right. I think there's a real powerful punch there.
Looking at the show, back to the show, you know, as I say, there's been a lot of software introductions across the show, but you're one of these people that always seems to ferret out what's new and what's what's happening. So what's been your take on the week?
Well, clearly on the technology side, I think there's a lot of innovations, you know, across the landscape. One common thread across many of the spaces is this whole CFX standard, right? The IPC's gotten behind it. I think the industry's eager for some sort of standard to bring some sort of tower, you know, to get away from the Tower of Babel, you know, sort of approach. But I also think there's a dilemma there in that, you know, and we've sort of proven it this week. If the solution is just to have 500,000 data points in 3 days, then I'd rather have the problem. Because I think that just begets a different problem, and I think that clarity is going to be the challenge moving forward. You know, because we've got this, you know, our current systems, you know, there's the more supply chain sort of oriented systems that overlay, you know, most operations these days. They tend not to be the sector experts in, you know, what's going on with my AOI or my SPI or my cleaner, my printer, my oven, whatever it may be. And I think, you know, assimilating all that sector expertise sounds a bit challenging. It is very challenging, and it kind of alludes to a discussion we had earlier in the week on our Smart Factory panel, and that is we talked about AI, and a lot of the panelists thought, well, AI is still way in the distance for all of us, but in actual fact, I think the volume of data is going to drive it closer and faster, because that's the only way we're going to be able to make sense of it. And I think that's the key here, and the other part of it is recognizing that your ability to record data may exceed your need to record data. The fact that you can take a measurement every, you know, 100 milliseconds doesn't mean that's interesting. Okay. You know, perhaps every few seconds might be just vast amounts of data that might even be more informative in some cases. That's true. So I think there's a lot of that sort of judgment that, and it's different in every space, right? You know, obviously the really high speed, you know, pick and place kind of tools, well, maybe that 100 millisecond thing's too slow. Maybe they need more data. But maybe going through the oven where the things move at a bit more modest pace, you know, the 100 millisecond thing just, you know, might be a little aggressive. Okay.
I think just to add to that, that the idea that you can package these software services to be scalable for people of different size. So when I was speaking with BTU, they were talking about how they can't compete with the amount of information you can get with a tool like from KIC or from ECD. But he said some of these people don't need it, and they don't want to spend, you know, X amount of dollars for that.
There's always that
just
point,
the
that
basic
scale
parameters,
curve,
so that they can scale up when they're needed. Or like Hanwha, their new command center-esque kind of software solution. They're talking about you can pick and choose what modules you want to load rather than having to get the whole service, and you may not need it.
Are you talking on the Hanwha, the stencil changer, on the
you know, they have a new
printer?
They call it T Solutions, I think is their just overriding software solutions package for all their data gathering and analytics.
Okay, great. Yeah. Any hardware developments on the show floor?
Well, you know, our expertise, of course, is on the cleaning side, and there it's on the control. You know, the control techniques and the data services that come along with that. You know, we personally are kind of trying to dig into that. You know, what is the data that people will find beneficial and valuable, whether in the moment, from a day-to-day, how are things running? Because I think we have to recognize that the users of this data have different buckets of needs. You know, there's in the moment because I don't want the line to stop. Right. You know, if the line's running, life is generally good. If the line's not running, life is generally bad, sometimes very bad. So this whole idea of what's that information that they need to make sure we live in the good life rather than the bad life, and is there without data overflow kind of thing? How can that be presented in a way to make life sort of copacetic? And then that second need is that down the road sort of stuff that says, gee, what do I need to validate my performance, during some sort of after-action audit? And maybe that's a richer data experience because we're picking with a bit of a finer line. And then there's the third bucket that says, how do I improve my operation? Can I change my operation conditions to reduce material consumption, to reduce power requirements? That's something Kik's doing a lot of work on in the oven world. How can we do that to further optimize the process? We've spent the last 20 years really creating very automated, very kind of out of the box in many ways. You don't need to be tremendously sophisticated to be able to run a straightforward SMT line anymore. That's a real advantage of what the technology has done. So the question becomes, since that user doesn't necessarily have to have that gravitas, how can we help them achieve further benefits, even though maybe doing that on an individual basis is beyond their scale, as you spoke to with earlier, but yet deliver some of that to them. Well, gee, the software starts to learn or starts to make recommendations. Well, gee, maybe a bit less energy and we can still get the job done. Maybe a bit less consumable and we can still get the job done. And maybe that's one of those value adders that comes back toward the users.
John Mitchell alluded to that a little bit earlier in the week, that the level of skill of the operator doesn't need to be quite as high as it used to be.
Right, in some ways.
In some ways. So therefore, we don't need to have people that have even degreed engineers. They can come in and learn on the job. It's much easier than it used to be.
And in many
cases, in some ways, but in other ways, they've got to be much more. The average person near the line has to be much more comfortable interacting with those screens and buttons than perhaps 10 or 15 years ago.
Correct.
And there's certainly many people in society that those screens with all those buttons is a bit intimidating.
But many people, I think, on the other hand, that we all use smartphones, and so many people are focused on making a UI that's so similar to a smartphone or a tablet that it's almost, if you're a younger person now and you get a job working in an SMT line, I think it's much easier.
Well, and that's a great insight, because there was a story, I guess 10 or 15 years ago, that the military had developed some of these early stage robots to go into scary places and kind of look around, and they had this awkward control system that it took forever to train the troops how to use, and then somebody scratched their head and said, Game Boy, Xbox, can't we plug it into that controller? They did the software work, they plugged it in the controller, it took 10 minutes to train the people to use the tool. So it eliminated a problem simply because of the interface, not a screen interface, but the control interface. So I think you're right, I think you're onto something there.
Excellent. Well, guys, unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time. We're on a time basis here, but I want to thank you both for your input. I think it's been a fabulous show this week.
Agreed.
And as I say, mostly software. There were a couple of hardware new products in there, but it's nice to see the industry so positive and so strong.
Absolutely. Really upbeat mood in the show, for sure.
And collaborative.
And collaborative.
It definitely feels collaborative.
Absolutely. So, thank you for joining me. Coming up after the break, we're going to have Walt Custer giving his roundup on where we're going to be going in the future.
Saki's newly developed unique inspection technology assures measurement performance and data reliability in M2M connection. Saki's AOI and quality-driven production are major components to the success of the smart factory.
And welcome back. I'm delighted to be joined by Walt Custer. He's a regular columnist in Global SMT and Packaging and a long-time friend. Nice to see you, Walt.
Thank you, Trevor.
Okay. So we spoke at Productronica about the state of the industry. It was a unique period in time. all ships seem to be rising at the time.
Yeah, they even got better in the last month and a half.
Absolutely. So, you know, where are we just now, and where do you think the market is going to be going in the future?
Well, the fourth quarter was really good globally. You know, we had growth almost 7% for electronic equipment, and things like printed wiring boards and this EMS companies. The combined EMS and ODM's growth in the fourth quarter is almost 20%.
20%?
Yeah.
That's an incredible.
Well, but you know, we know that it's cyclical
Right.
and seasonal, and there was a lot of cell phone production in the fourth quarter in Asia.
Right.
So if you felt, Foxconn had a record month by over 100,000
Cell phones?
NT dollars, I guess it would be 100 million, but
Right.
about 20% more than they had ever done before. So
Right.
it was really a good fourth quarter all across. But all of the domestic companies did well. So we closed 2017 on definitely a high note.
Okay. Do you have some charts on that?
Yeah.
You
But
have a chart coming up on that?
Well, this was the growth of electronic equipment by quarter, and you can see for the last, 6 or 7 quarters, we've been in positive territory, and it was at the highest growth since about 2010. Now, you know, that's a pretty healthy, and some of those higher other things were following a big sharp downturn, so it was recoveries, but this wasn't a recovery. This was just sustained growth for about 7 quarters.
Right.
And it was virtually in all product lines and whatever. Maybe we can get the next chart up on there and see.
So the next chart's going
Yeah,
to...
this just expands that growth by type of product. So this is the global supply chain for electronic equipment. You can see electronic equipment was up about 7%, but for everything except for business and office equipment, which is kind of a small product line now, was in positive territory. And look at some of the growth areas. Semiconductor capital equipment was up 32%.
That's huge.
Printed wiring board capital equipment was up 25%. You know, everything was did well, and
as
the
you
automotive,
said, the large EMS, excluding Foxconn.
yeah, I excluded Foxconn for the fourth quarter, and that's just for a small group of companies. But that number I quoted you before was for 53 companies combined on both EMS and ODM. Yeah, Foxconn had a really strong one, but so it was just right across the board.
Right across the board.
Strong
And yet, when you read the headlines, I mean, Foxconn does a lot of stuff for Apple, but Apple apparently scaled back on the production.
But not in the fourth quarter. They didn't.
I see.
You know, that's when they were doing
The X.
the X or the 10 or whatever you want to call it. So, just in general, it was a very strong quarter. Right? I mean, it had to be because we looked at Foxconn's sales in the fourth quarter. They were far above what they had ever been before.
Right. Okay. Good. So where do you see the market going in the future?
Well, I think
few months?
clearly we started off on the right track.
Yep.
And we can't grow at the numbers that we grew forever and ever. Semiconductors in the last year grew 21.5% or something like that. So,
right. Now, I remember you saying that the semiconductor materials were outgrowing PCBs, for example. You said at Productronica that the PCB sales were at a certain level, but the
semiconductors. Well, yes,
semiconductors.
Maybe the materials too, but the semiconductors way outgrew it. As I said, they were for the year they grew they were growing I think around 22% or something. And printed wiring boards picked up their growth. Right. And in the fourth quarter they came up, but they didn't grow as much as semiconductors. And I think the reason semiconductors grew so much is because of memory chips, both in shortages and pricing. Right. So prices went up, and I think there was some overbuying because semiconductors grew far more than the end markets.
Right. Yeah. So do you think that
the
stock still?
World Semiconductor Trade Statistics just came out today with their new forecast, and it's for 9.5% growth this year, as opposed to 22.5% last year. So you know, it's still growing. I think 2018 will still be a good year. I don't expect the bubbles that we had on some products in 2017.
Okay.
And new things will come in. I'm very excited about 5G. Not only as a fast for communicating on its own, but for being able to support things like autonomous driving.
Right.
So I think we're going to see a long period of growth of a lot of those things over at least 3, 4, 5 years, which will be high volume, high growth markets that are going to kick in. And as personal computer growth has gone flat, cell phone growth is not that dramatic anymore.
True.
But we got a bunch of new things on the horizon. The Internet of Things, but in particular 5G and then the automotive industry. The suppliers to the automotive industry grew about 18% in the fourth quarter.
Right, right.
So that was very encouraging.
Yeah.
We may have a couple more charts. I'm not sure what's up.
Okay.
Oh, this was the growth of printed wiring boards worldwide. And you can see we ended up the year up almost 7%. And that's much better than we had ever done before.
Absolutely.
Korea was strong, or Korean suppliers were strong, making flex circuits for people like Apple. You know.
Right. So that's the strongest growth we've seen since 2008.
Yeah, so you know, wherever you look, it was a good year.
Absolutely.
And I think next year will be good too, but this year will be good too. Printed wiring boards will still have good growth. Now, one thing I should caution on that growth is denominated in U.S. dollars.
Right.
And the dollar is weakened, which means you convert foreign currencies that are stronger to dollars, it inflates it. The numbers that I've shown, probably for world numbers, may be inflated by 25%, just because of exchange
the currency
rates.
Exchange rates,
Which is, you know, you win some, you lose some, but if you're just looking at the U.S. market in U.S. dollars, that doesn't apply, but it certainly applies when you put euros and yen back into dollars.
Right, right, okay. So you need to bear that in mind when you're looking at these numbers.
There may be one last chart, I'm not sure. Oh, this just shows, this was when we talked about the growth of the EMS, when we put them all together, this is about 52 companies, and they're both ODM and EMS, and that was where I got the 19%. Just the fourth quarter was a whopping.
Right. So do you think that was companies that still had a lot of budget left and they were using it before the end of the year? Is that why there was such a spike in the last quarter, or was it driven by the Christmas market, or what drove that?
Well,
spike?
Clearly you can see the Christmas market because it's a fourth quarter peak. But I think the rest of it, I don't think an EMS company has extra budget that they produce stuff with. My guess is that they just was sort of an across the board stronger demand in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, but a lot of companies have budget for buying equipment, and
but this isn't equipment.
No,
this is producing product.
Producing product. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I know we're not looking at capital equipment.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Let's see if there's one more chart.
You had some
there.
talking points that you on another chart. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I did have some talking points to close. I said that last year was the growth was broad, geographically and product-wise, and memory demand drove semiconductors. We had a copper foil shortage, which is still there from what I can see in the data.
Okay.
And you know the reason that happened, a lot of it got they get better prices for it in the battery industry with copper foil than they get for PC.
So that creates a shortage.
And there certainly is a shortage of passive components right now. People are really worried about that.
Right. Right. Okay.
I think we've seen price increases because things are in short supply.
Yep.
And as I said, automotive and internet things that are going to drive things. So
future growth drivers.
Yeah, it's looking very positive for this year. I guess my only worry is if we have a big geopolitical outbreak someplace.
Well,
I mean, Russia today announcing that they have, a nuclear weapons that can't be stopped by other countries and things like that. I mean, for example, 75% of the memory chips are made on the Korean Peninsula. If we ever had a blowout there, that would basically take out the world electronics industry.
And the world economy as well, I think, in many ways.
Yeah.
So you can't predict these things, I guess. But what about things closer to home? I mean, we just recently had a round of tax breaks, if you like, in the U.S., and also some repatriation of money. Is this likely to show later in the year? Is
I don't know what they're going to do with the money. I've heard some companies where the owners pocketed it.
Right. Okay.
And some they give it to the employees. Some of them they reinvest. So I think it's a little early to tell what the impact of that's going to be. I'm not going to go stick my neck out on that. But I think it's going to be a variety of things.
Right. Okay. Well, Walt, it's always a pleasure to get your valuable insight into where the industry is going, and we want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Trevor.
Okay, thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's morning show live at APEX. I want to thank all of my guests this week, and I want to thank you for joining us.
Smart factory solutions for any mix, any volume. Total integrated solutions, allowing you to focus on your business while we manage your production challenges.
Delivered worldwide, Nordson Simtek's team of experts are ready to support your next adventure.